Dylan Roof spoke to the jury that will decide whether he gets the death penalty for the Charleston church massacre.
Does that mean that there are not other crimes out there? Absolutely not.
No matter where we live in the world, we can't avoid the presence of crime. Even the most organized and safe countries have produced some of the most notorious criminals in history. We could say that there are various types of criminals out there. While some are punished by simple community service as a way to repay society, others are given a more severe punishment to match their crimes. Today, we look at some of the most dangerous prison inmates in the world. Number 1. Nico Jenkins. Even those who believe in second chances must rethink their attitude already in this first example.
Not fit to face the death penalty. A ruling today changes the next step in the case of convicted killer Nico Jenkins.
Nico Jenkins was born into a family of troublemakers who were known to the police. Violence and abuse of substances were all around this young boy who, at his early age, was heavily neglected and left to his own wits. Considering this, we won't be surprised to find out that family members were involved in over 100 police cases. The justice system met Nico quite early in his childhood. Namely, he was only 7 years old at the time that he brought a handgun to school. This, however, wasn't one of the incidents involving murder that we will discuss today. Although, these will come soon enough. At the age of 11, Nico has clearly shown his potential to be a troublemaker. The group home that he was put into had to expel him since he kept getting into violent fights with others. After performing 2 armed carjackings, he was sent to prison at the age of 17. As we can see, the idea of correcting his behavior through such means didn't take. 5 years were soon added to his sentence for assaulting a prison guard. After some more commotion, Nico was released in 2013, experiencing freedom for the first time in quite a while. At that time, he was 26 years old, and his face was already heavily covered with tattoos, making him look scary. After serving 10 years in prison, it took him less than 15 days on the outside to show his true colors. 2 people were found dead in a car in Omaha. After shooting them through their heads, the perpetrator emptied their pockets and ran away. No clear reason or connection could be established between the victims and Jenkins. 8 days later, the next victim was shot twice in the back. The connection this time was apparent, as the scary Nico had even posted a Facebook photo with the man a day before it happened. The final confirmation that Jenkins was a curse released upon society was his 4th victim. After killing this woman with multiple gunshots, he stole her car, and even though he tried, he failed to set it on fire before he escaped. Nico was brought to justice after the police were contacted by a woman who witnessed him getting armed by one of his cousins. He used the gun to threaten the woman and her family. A worrisome detail that also came to light later was that he mentioned he would send demonic forces to hunt her family members. He was arrested and charged with terroristic threats. Once he got arrested, things started to turn up, pointing the police to various other heinous deeds he was responsible for. The mystery of his victims remained an unsolved one, as he murdered both those he knew and didn't know at all. After serious questioning and many hours exploring this scary mind, some explanations emerged. Namely, explaining his actions, Jenkins calls upon Apophis and his demons. For those who don't know what this is, it is a being mentioned in the Book of the Dead, a snake-like deity that embodies darkness and disorder and opposes all truth and order. Not only does he blame Apophis for the 4 murders he admitted to, but he finds the state guilty of not helping him, going as far as claiming that they shouldn't have released him without providing proper help. Naturally claims that an Egyptian god is ordering him to commit crimes, made a psychiatric assessment necessary. These concluded that Nico has an antisocial personality disorder, and such a conclusion suggests that he is making up all of this. What's more, he refused treatments offered for his troubles. As he stood trial, he later attempted speaking in unknown languages, howling and acting as if he was possessed by the deity he blamed for the crimes he committed. One would think this blood-chilling case would be over once he was sentenced guilty of the murders. This didn't turn out to be the case. Instead, the sociopathic criminal kept injuring himself on multiple occasions, going as far as to carve 666 onto his forehead back in 2015. Since he relied on a mirror while doing so, the writing turned out to be backward. Staying one of the most dangerous inmates in the whole world, he didn't stop at that, but later split his tongue to look like a serpent's and attempted to carve the word Satan on his face. To put an end to this scary case, 3 judges joined in the decision to sentence him to 450 years in prison and a death sentence. Number 2. Dylan Roof. In the previous example, we have seen a murderer offer an explanation suggesting an Egyptian god was behind the crimes he committed. The next prison inmate whose case we examine has quite a different approach. He justifies his gruesome crimes through ideology. Dylan Roof is a white supremacist who was convicted of mass murder.
Dylan Roof spoke to the jury that will decide whether he gets the death penalty for the Charleston church massacre.
This guy was born in Columbia, South Carolina. His parents were divorced but briefly reconciled, and as luck would have it, Dylan Roof was born. When the boy turned 5, his father married again and was allegedly verbally and physically abusive towards the woman. It could be that the household the boy was raised in was quite a harsh one. This marriage ended in a divorce after 10 years. Once his mother filed for divorce, Roof showed what was noted to be obsessive-compulsive behavior. In him, it manifested as a germophobia and a peculiarity about the hairstyle. As we will see, the troubles kept brewing in him through middle school as well, as he was known to have abused drugs. Due to his troublesome behavior, he attended 7 or more different schools in South Carolina counties. In 2010, he even stopped attending classes, and his only activities were using drugs and playing video games. Before the atrocious deed he committed, he was in the care of his mother, but he also occasionally stayed at his friends. He was no stranger to alcohol and drugs. The only job he could score was that of a landscaper, which his father provided, and before the incident, he quit the job. Other members of his family also got worried. One of his uncles was certain that something wasn't right, as the boy excluded himself from all activities. Even though he was 19 years old, he wasn't showing any concrete interest or a promising future. Unfortunately, there were red flags that weren't clear enough for anyone to react on time. Namely, he was arrested twice, just a month before he executed the deed. One of the charges was for drug possession. The second event was a more serious one. It happened that one of the officers who was involved in his first arrest noticed him behaving strangely around a vehicle. After exploring the car, they found in it a grip for a semi-automatic rifle and 6 empty magazines. Although these were troubling signals, police couldn't place any charges on the young man, as owning these items wasn't illegal. He even said on that occasion that he wanted to buy a gun but couldn't find money for it. Unfortunately, these steps have led to the mass shooting that happened at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. As the group was doing a Bible study routine, Roof opened fire with a handgun. In what became known as the Charleston church shooting, Roof killed 9 people during a prayer service. One other person was injured during this incident. Among the victims, there was a pastor and a state senator, and all of the victims were African Americans. When the dust of this event settled and he was caught, many other signs were also recognizable as problematic in his behavior. We find out that he indeed was racist, and such elements could have been recognized in his behavior. Even though he had some black friends, he often stated that black people are taking over the world, and even openly claimed that he would want to attack the College of Charleston. These were not taken seriously. What also appeared were Facebook images of him wearing symbols that associate him with the American white supremacy movement. The goal of the shooting he committed was to start a civil war and to cause racial segregation in the United States. We even find out that he wanted to attack the school, but since his goal was a massacre and he couldn't get into the school, he chose this church instead. Weirdly enough, Dylann Roof didn't pick up this ideology from people he knew who could have introduced him to it. Instead, it seems it was his own will and research on the internet that led him to develop such beliefs. He seems to have even put up a site on which symbols such as neo-Nazi code, numbers 88 and 1488 are found. He was also seen disgracing the American flag in various ways. Another scary detail was his manifest. By only naming its sections, we believe that our audience will get the idea. They were named as follows: Blacks, Jews, Hispanics, East Asians, patriotism. Since the deed was recognized as a hate crime, even the FBI was involved in the manhunt. He was caught thanks to the reaction of the public, since a woman recognized him and called the authorities. They found the murderer with a pistol at his side. It turned out that he had been planning this deed for almost 6 months. As a punishment, he has received 1 life sentence for each life he has taken, resulting in the final punishment being 9 life sentences. Number 3. Thomas Silverstein. We can certainly see how 2 previous prisoners made it onto this list. Now imagine how scary one would have to be to earn themselves the nickname Terrible Tommy. His criminal career began in 1971. At that time, Thomas was 19 years old and was put in jail for an armed robbery. A few years later, he was released on parole. This, as it turns out, wasn't a good move. It would seem that troubles run in the family, as he was soon after caught again doing what got him in prison in the first place. Together with his father and uncle, he committed 3 armed robberies. This is how he found himself in prison again, and this time he was serving a 15-year-long punishment. We would think, oh, but that doesn't seem too scary of a crime. Then again, let us tell you that the reason he is on this list comes mainly from all the devious things he did as an inmate. In prison, Terrible Tommy ended up being a part of the Aryan Brotherhood, a neo-Nazi gang well known for crimes that happen not just in prison, but beyond it as well. Soon after, his list of crimes was updated to include another murder that he had committed. He took the life of another inmate after he refused to become a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. For this crime, Thomas was sentenced to life without parole. He was also sent to a prison in Marion, Illinois, a place known at the time as one of the most hardcore prisons. This decision was overturned by a judge, but this didn't matter, as Thomas didn't seem to have intended to stop committing murders. It didn't take him long to attack and murder another inmate who was a national leader of the Black Gang, the same group that the previous guy he murdered also belonged to. What further increased his scary reputation was that the second guy he murdered was out to get him, and in that way, revenge the gang member whom Thomas had murdered. But in this unexpected turn of events, the one doing the hunt has actually ended up dead, and with 67 stab wounds. After committing this murder, Thomas even dragged the body around as a trophy that he showed to other inmates. This begins to paint us a picture of a man who has nothing to lose and is eager and decisive to live a life of crime associated with prison gangs. What was done to prevent him from committing more crimes in prison was a decision that an officer would keep an eye on him and make sure he behaved according to the rules. This didn't seem to sit well with Terrible Tommy, as we are slowly nearing the reason why he became one of the most heavily guarded prisoners in the world. As he was being escorted to the shower, he managed to slip out of the cuffs and stab the officer 40 times with a shank. Luckily, this action was enough of a statement. It explained that Thomas was never planning to stop his criminal career and that he was maybe just getting started. To cease such developments, a decision was made that he would be placed in total isolation. A soundproof cell was the final solution that would separate this deadly inmate from everyone else. The cell included only a black and white TV, and he had access to pen and paper. He wasn't allowed any visitors, and the only people he could contact were psychologists sent once a month to monitor his state. To ensure further safety from this menace, he wasn't allowed to have any possessions, and the lights in his cell were constantly on and monitored by cameras and 2 correctional officers. It is speculated that his ruthlessness may have even been a part of the push that the prison systems needed to consider and develop the idea of maximum security cells. In 2018, Thomas left prison for the first time since 1897. This was due to heart problems that caused his death in hospital. Number 4, Golden State Killer. This next criminal, whose case we examine, has been called many names. While we have somewhat understood the twisted motivations of previous criminals, this one, Joseph James DeAngelo, has had a strong determination to stay behind bars his whole life. One of the names he first earned was the Visalia Ransacker, as in the 1970s, he started out as a burglar. He used to observe people's behaviors and study them closely, after which he would break into their houses and steal their goods. However, it didn't end there. Even though he started out as a burglar, he soon turned into a killer. During the first murder he committed, he shot down a man and beat his young daughter right next to him, after which he ran off.
DeAngelo fired 2 shots, hitting my dad. He then turned the gun on me as I was down on the ground. My only thought was, this is it.
The next name that he was called was the East Area Rapist, a name that, at the same time, explains the crimes that he committed. Those included kidnapping and raping on various occasions. As time went by, he kept successfully avoiding capture, and his crimes became more and more gruesome and sadistic. He turned out to be a real predator who dominated and even contacted the victims after he had committed the crime. Some of these calls were placed quite late at night and could even contain threats that he would kill the person he was speaking to. In this way, he not only terrorized his victims, but kept them bound to this unimaginable experience and made them keep living in fear. He even went as far as to toy with the law by calling the police and leaving suspicious threats that crimes would occur. As if all of this wasn't enough, this serial murderer and rapist then started killing couples. Some speculated that his appetite for crime and toying with the police has grown, and that this is what made him change his type of crime. Even though DeAngelo started committing crimes in the 70s, he was only arrested in 2018. Many have tried to understand how he could be so good at avoiding cops. In part, the answer may lie in the fact that he himself was one for 6 years. By investigating burglary cases, he may have learned how to avoid being caught. He may have even tampered with evidence that would have been found on the scene, and once he was caught stealing, he was fired. At one point, we even got close to catching this deviant criminal. A police officer nearly caught him and fired a shot, just barely missing him. Since it was during nighttime and DeAngelo returned fire, hitting the officer's lamp, he couldn't pursue him further. Even so, the criminal was caught 40 years later. As was found out all this time, he lived a seemingly normal life with his family, blending in and acting as a respectful member of the community. Later, we learned that he was quite abusive towards the members of his family as well. One creepy detail that is suggested in a later investigation is that he even paused his criminal activities for about 5 years after his daughter was born in the 80s. The world was indeed shocked once it was published that the man known as the Golden State Killer was finally caught.
Joseph James D'Angelo has been called a lot of things by law enforcement. He's been called the East Side Rapist. He's been called the Visalia Ransacker, the original Night Stalker, and the Golden State Killer. Today, it's our pleasure to call him defendant.
As a way to avoid the death penalty, he admitted guilt for many cases of kidnapping, rape, and murder. Among these, there were 13 murders and kidnappings. Nearing the end of the trial, the Golden State Killer even decided to speak out, surprising those in court. In this brief statement, he apologized to all of those that he had hurt.
Listen, all your statements, each one of them. And I'm really sorry.
Some find this as just another way to mock the authorities for not being able to apprehend him for so long. While it may not be a true compensation for all the pain and suffering this man has caused, he was given 12 life sentences and an additional 8 years in prison.
Does that mean that there are not other crimes out there? Absolutely not.
5. Robert Maudsley. As this next example will show us, we shouldn't be surprised that these most dangerous prison inmates have found their way to solitary confinement. Robert Maudsley, known as Hannibal the Cannibal or the Brain Eater, is Britain's prisoner who served the longest time in solitary confinement. Robert was born in 1953 and had quite a bumpy childhood. Due to neglect in the family, he was taken into social care alongside his siblings, of which there were 12. Only 3 of those ended up in the same care home as him. After 8 years of living in such institutions, children were reclaimed by their parents, who were once declared unfit for this role, and as we will find out, they weren't any better now. Things were quite dramatic, and a lot of violence happened between the kids and the father of the family. Even in this troublesome household, Robert seemed to have gotten the short end of the stick. He was most often the target of the physical abuse that took place. On occasions, he was even locked up inside a room for over 6 months. All of this certainly didn't help develop a healthy mindset. Due to suicide attempts later in his life, he wasn't a stranger to psychiatric institutions, and drug addiction got him selling his body to men. One of those men would turn out to be his first murder victim. At the time, Robert was 21 years old, and he decided to be a judge, jury, and executioner to a man who boasted about sexually abusing children and going as far as showing him the pictures. This enraged the already unstable mind, and it came up with a brief plan of action. After taking the man to a public toilet, he strangled him with a necktie. Claiming that he had done the right thing and that the world should thank him, Robert was sentenced to life in prison and put in a psychiatric institution for criminally insane. A decision that may have put a seal on his life. Namely, such institutions are also those where convicted pedophiles could be placed. Considering his history and the deed that got him imprisoned, we can see how putting these people close to each other may not have been the best idea. In 1977, Robert and another prisoner took the life of a convicted pedophile. Before delivering the final blow, Robert took his time barricading himself in a cell and torturing the victim for 9 hours. What the police officers found once they breached the door was quite a gruesome scene. The victim's brain was stabbed with a spoon. Even though they were not true, we can see where names such as Hannibal the Cannibal or the Brain Eater came from. Besides the nicknames, this move earned Robert a transfer to a ruthless prison. About a year after the previous murder, Maudsley showed the world his attitudes about pedophiles hadn't changed, and neither did his idea of murdering them. Placed in this new environment, he planned to kill 7 child abusers in a single day. As that day came, he first invited a man into his cell and murdered him. After hiding his body, he attempted to lure the rest of those from the kill list and assault them in a similar way. Since none of them accepted the invitation, he decided to go on and openly attack them. In this maniacal rampage, he entered another inmate's cell and smashed his head on the wall. This was the end of the attack, as he walked up to the correctional officers and told them that there would be fewer prisoners now. These actions are what put Robert Maudsley in solitary confinement. Later, in 1983, a special maximum security unit was created to keep those like him away from people. He is placed under constant watch and is essentially deprived of all human contact even now. We have seen many notorious criminals and discovered what made them so scary to be named the most dangerous prison inmates. They proved destructive enough to cause fear in people outside and within the prison walls. Luckily for us, the laws and societies we have formed don't allow such people to roam our planet freely. As we are bringing things to a close, we can recognize that this list reminds us how lucky we are to have never crossed paths with such people.